Welcome to Next Level Play Therapy, a weekly podcast dedicated to supporting the next generation of child and adolescent therapists to provide exceptional play therapy services. We'll explore all things play therapy to elevate your work with children and adolescents using the therapeutic powers of play. I'll discuss practical tips and ideas so you can provide a transformative experience for your young clients and make a real difference in their lives. So get ready to take your play therapy skills to the next level and make a lasting impact in the lives of children, adolescents, and families. Hey there, good morning. Welcome to this week's episode talking about all things play therapy and expressive arts. And this week I want to focus on some of the mistakes that I have witnessed and heard people saying when they are talking about progress notes. So progress notes is one of those things that if you're in the mental health field and you have to document your sessions, progress notes is probably one of our least favorite things to do. It is typically not the reason we get into the play therapy field or mental health therapy in general. It's not something we aspire to do when we are going through graduate school to be in the mental health field and become a mental health counselor. It is typically the last thing that is on our mind, and yet it really is an important part of the services that we provide. So having a good understanding of progress notes is really important. I think one of the things that I find is there's not a lot of training on writing progress notes when you're going through graduate school. Typically, when you're in your graduate school program, if you're getting any training on documentation, it's typically in the agency where you're doing your field placement. And then once you get out and get your job, typically that's where you get the vast majority of your training. And one of the things that I've noticed over the last 30 years in the mental health field is that most places do a terrible job with onboarding training. I've worked in a handful, actually really only a couple of places where they did really good onboarding as far as the training. And yet it's a really important part of the process. So that's why I thought it would be a good topic to talk about. I've also created a course. It's going to be launching in January, writing play therapy progress notes. And I have a pre-launch sale going on now this week. So I'll talk about that more at the end if you're interested. It's an online course, so you can take it in your own time and in your own time zone. So I have heard some things about progress notes and habits or strategies that people have developed writing progress notes. So I want to dismantle a few of those today and give some tips and thoughts and suggestions about what I think is a more effective way to do that. First, before I do that, I really want to check in and see who's here. If you are watching me live on my weekly live stream in my Facebook group, which is Play and Expressive Arts Therapy, or my LinkedIn channel, or YouTube, or even here on Instagram, go ahead and post your name in the comments. I would love to see who's here. Let's see. So we have Cathi here. Hi, Cathi. Welcome back. It's good to see you again, or, virtually see you. Thanks for joining us. And I would love to know, what are some of the things that you've heard about progress notes or questions that you have about progress notes. So what I'm not going to do in this weekly live stream, mostly because of privacy concerns, we don't want to discuss specific client issues here in the live stream, just for privacy reasons. If you have general questions, we can discuss those. And if you are watching on the replay, go ahead and post your questions, where you're from, some of the things you've heard. And in February, I was planning on launching my podcast in January, but I had to delay it a bit to get these courses out. So if you're listening in February or beyond, you are listening on my podcast, welcome. So post your comments. Let's see who's here, and let's get started. Let's see. Oh, from my Facebook group. Hey, Amy, welcome. Amy's in my Facebook group. Alrighty, so first, what we are talking about today is mistakes to avoid when you're writing play therapy progress notes. And I get a lot of questions about writing progress notes in my when I do trainings, when I'm just talking to people. And also in Play Therapy Academy, these will come up. Usually when I'm doing a lot of my trainings, how do you document that in a progress note is always a question I get asked. So I thought it would be a relevant topic for this weekly episode. Last week, I talked a little bit about progress notes as well. So if you didn't catch that episode from last week, then I would highly recommend going back and watching that one. The first mistake that I see people make writing progress notes is writing too little information. And I'm talking 2 or 3 sentences for the entire progress notes, maybe 5 sentences. And usually this is rooted in a practical concern, which is a valid concern, which is not enough time and trying to, progress notes are not the thing we love doing. You might be the rare person who loves progress notes. I don't like writing progress notes. I'm going to be honest. And I do see the value of them. So I do make sure when I'm writing progress notes that I do them with intention and doing a good job writing them, even though I don't like writing them. So I just like to make sure that I'm doing a good job. Writing too little information is usually about wanting to save time. It's also about being afraid of what might happen if anybody sees these progress notes other than your eyes, which is also a valid concern. If you're working with children and adolescents, the likelihood you've got families that are court involved is pretty high. The likelihood the medical records in a custody dispute are going to get subpoenaed. These are the things, I don't know, outside of the United States, if you guys have this happen, I'm going to guess you do. Here in the United States, we do have this happen, which is the medical records get subpoenaed for court purposes, which means it takes it out of the hands of the play therapist being able to protect what is written in the progress note. And in our code of ethics here in the United States, depending on which discipline you're in, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. We also have mental health counselors, and we also have marriage and family therapists and psychologists. And all of our code of ethics, there's in each one of these, there's usually something in there about ensuring the progress notes. One, they're well written and they're done, and also maintaining privacy with private. So it's a really valid concern, and I definitely the concern. What I see happening though is there's nothing really in there, and that doesn't serve the purpose of the progress notes. And if you're in an agency, or maybe you're billing insurance, or you're an agency that sees a lot of Medicaid clients, here in the United States, that's our public insurance, then the likelihood there's going to be an audit for Medicaid is very high. The other insurance companies, if it's private, may or may not get audited. And sometimes I've had charts audited. And the thing that you want to be concerned about is the purpose of the progress note is to provide documentation, one of, first and foremost, documentation that the session occurred. So if you have billed and you have charged money for this session, then you really need to have a corresponding progress note that documents what was done in this session. You want to have enough information in there that gives a good understanding of the relevant aspects of what happened in that session, because your progress notes also provide documentation about how your clients are doing working towards their treatment goals. So those goals and objectives and problem areas you identified in your progress, in your treatment plans, your progress notes are a way of documenting how your client is doing working towards those treatment goals. This is where your treatment plan is an important documentation as well. So that's a whole other episode that I've talked about treatment plans. So if you're interested in that topic, you want to go back and watch some of my previous episodes in the replays, because your treatment plans are important. They're like your roadmap. And treatment plans are going to be influenced by your case conceptualization, which is essentially your psychosocial assessment. That first appointment, doing that thorough history taking to gather important information you can use for your case conceptualization, which is case conceptualization is what exactly is the problem, what's going on, that are the roots, the reason your client is coming, the roots of the behavior, and why is it happening, what's going on in their lives that might be maintaining and supporting this problematic situation. So all of these tie together. There's also previous episodes about all of these things. So your progress notes should be they're part of, I don't know if you've ever heard the term, the golden thread analogy. I love that term. Actually, I first heard that term through the Association for Play Therapy, and I fell in love with it. So I have definitely been highlighting that a little bit more lately. The golden thread analogy is basically from your psychosocial assessment to your treatment plan, to your progress notes, and essentially your discharge plan. You should be able to see the connection between all of those. And that is a problem that I see not occurring. And why does that matter? It's kind of like the way in which you're approaching your treatment with your client and how they're progressing and what it is they're working on. And here's the reality of it. Even if you use a play therapy model that is more kind of open, like child-centered play therapy, that's my default model. There aren't specific, like I'm not picking out interventions that we're going to be doing in each session. That being said, in child-centered play therapy, there's a structure. There are phases of treatment. In each stage of treatment, there are certain things that will be accomplished based on your case conceptualization that you did at the very beginning, before you even got started with your play therapy sessions, hopefully. You will have a sense of what's going on. And then throughout the change process, you're observing how that change process is coming about. And there will be evidence of the change happening in the child's life. And so even with those treatment models that are more process-oriented and child-led, there's still structure. So you still have the ability to have a treatment plan, and your progress notes will connect to that treatment plan, which connects to your case conceptualization to get an idea of what is going on with your client. Writing too little information means you don't have the ability to see how your client progressed through all of those stages of change, where they ran into challenges, because that will happen, how those were addressed, how you address the things that went on in their lives in those parent sessions or family play therapy sessions. Because, and this is for like agencies, if you work for an agency and like you may have clients who maybe came when they were 4 or 5 and then they come back later, or maybe they came when they were 8 and they came back again when they were 10. And maybe by then there's a different, that the therapist that with the client before is gone, but now there's another therapist involved. That therapist should be able to go back and read your record to get a sense of what happened. That way, it's not like your client is completely starting over, having to explain everything. If you have the ability to go back and read what happened, then you can provide more support to your client that way and make this transition to a new person and back into the therapy process. You can make that a little easier. So there are some minimum things, minimum to be in your progress note. And there are different formats. And so one of the things in the play therapy progress note course that I have coming out in January, I have a pre-launch sale going on now. So you can get it, basically you can get this course for free in this I have. But in the course, one of the things that I do is a lot of the questions that come up about play therapy progress notes is, what do I put in there? How do I know what happened in the session that I need to put in the progress note, which is a fair point. And this leads into problem number 1 and problem number 2, which is the one I'm going to get to next, which is if I really want to pick out the most relevant parts of the session and document those, but how do I know what to look for? So in the course, I did a whole module on what to look for. We talk about themes. There's actually a whole document in there about different themes. But also, the other thing is using different formats like a SOAP format or ADAPT format or the BURP format. How do you take that information from the session and put it in this structure? And if you can do that, then you're going to have enough structure to be able to support. One of the fears that people have is my clients' records get audited and bad things are going to happen with the audit and may get money taken back or some other bad things that we imagine and hear about. And trust me, I've billed insurance 16 years in private practice, and billing insurance is a beast. And I have my own horror stories, but none of them involve progress notes or documentation. And following these structures gives you the support you need. Within those structures, though, there's minimum information needed. The minimum information needed is basically what was the information about that session. So that includes who was in the session, where was the session, what types of interventions were used. Like I'll usually put my intervention as child-centered play therapy if I'm working with little ones. And what happened in the session, who did what did the child say, those kinds of information. And then there's always going to be some kind of an assessment section where you take what was done in the session, what occurred in the session, and this is your clinical assessment of what happened. This is where identifying themes can come in handy and be based on what you saw in the session. So it is an assessment. and how your client is progressing towards their treatment goals. So if you have the language from your treatment plan, you can use that language in your progress notes to make that golden thread connection, to tie those together. So you're going to have some kind of assessment in there. And then what's the plan? So when's the next session? What time is it? Is there anything you're going to do between this section and session and the next session? Is there anything parents are going to do? Is there anything the child's going to do? You want to put that in there. So that's the minimum information, which leads me into the next mistake people make, which is too much information. You don't have to write every little minute detail of what happened in the session. You will burn yourself out. It's not necessary, and it will burn you out because that just takes too much time. You need to be able to focus on what were the relevant, important aspects of what happened in the session and support that in your progress note. So writing too much information, one, it takes up way too much time. Two, if the records can be subpoenaed for court purposes is a valid concern. And here's where writing too much information is not helpful, especially if it ends up in the hands of court professionals who are not mental health professionals and they have a different code of ethics. That is not the same of code of ethics for mental health professionals. They are going to be doing their job, which is not the same job that we in the mental health field have. So writing too much information in there can create problems with that. The next thing, so you really make sure you get those relevant points. The next mistake that I see happening a lot is not a lot. It does more than I would like to say it happens. Over the course of my career, part of the supervisory roles that I've had, both as an owner of a group practice that billed insurance, plus working for other agencies and supervising PIS and students. This is mostly when I'm just going to say it. It's not going to be very nice. I don't mean it to be mean, but there are some really bad habits that got formed writing progress notes. And if your agency did not squash these and require better habits, then what I've seen is there's some bad habits that got formed. And one of the bad habits that I've noticed getting formed is copy and paste type of approach, which just makes me cringe. So what do I mean by copy and paste? Copy and paste approach is basically, I'm going to copy and paste most of the information, like very similar information from session to session to session in the progress notes. The justification I've heard for this is, well, they're doing the same thing anyway, so it's a time saver. And while I recognize the validity of the intent for the strategy, it's a terrible strategy. And I'm just going to say it. It's just a terrible strategy. And it just makes me want to start twitching. And I'll tell you why. It looks like fraud. It looks like you didn't really have a session and you're copying information, because that does happen. There are times that people don't really have a session. They bill for a session and they use some, very kind of copy and paste things. I wish that didn't happen. And it does. I don't think it happens a ton, because I think in our profession, we have a lot of very ethical people. And for a lot of variety of reasons, sometimes that does happen. But let's say that you weren't, that you did have the session. It was legitimate. When you do the copy and paste, it looks like you didn't. Your progress note is your record of the session. And so it should be, you should see how this session is different from the next session, and how this current day's session is different from the week before, the previous session. Now, kids will do some similar things in their play from week to week. Your progress note should indicate that each session was in fact unique, in that the way you document it is demonstrating what happened in each specific session. So I use certain terms. There are certain terms that I use frequently. However, even the terms, when I use them, you can tell my notes are not exactly the same as the one before or the one after. So I've seen progress where the therapist wrote like 4 sentences, and of the 4 sentences, 3 of them were exactly the same from session to session to session to session to session. And one of the sentences was half the same, and there were a few words changed. That's not one, it did not give me a good indication of what exactly happened in the session. And here's my point, something to think about. Let's say your worst fear is true, or maybe it's just my worst fear, that you're working with a client and they're court involved and the records get subpoenaed, and you have to you get subpoenaed to show up in court despite all your best efforts. Let's just say that happened, because that's the fear, right? That's the one I hear. These are the fears that I hear. Plus, I have these fears. I don't like getting subpoenaed to court. And let's say you have to justify your court testimony. Those progress notes that I just got, just that style, can't support testimony with those. You can't, because there's not enough information in there, and it'll look like you're just making things up. And you might not be. Like you might be very have a lot of integrity and showing up with your best intentions. And I think that's usually the case. But here's the other thing. If we have to testify, we want to go back and look at our records. I can't remember from 2 years, if I've been working with the client for 2 years or even a year, especially if I have a caseload full of clients. I want to be able to look back and read through the record to prepare for testimony. And if I have that kind of medical record, I can't do that. So one of those that I hear a lot about not writing very much at all is, what if your records get subpoenaed? And that's a possibility. And while we don't like it and we do the best that we can to make sure that they don't, people have the right to make decisions about the medical records of their children. That's the right they have. Your ability to write progress notes well will support your ability to go through that process well. So writing very little, I don't think it protects you. In fact, I think it kind of helps you in the end. Writing too much might not be so helpful. The copy and paste is definitely not going to be helpful. And it looks like you didn't do the session, and anybody coming behind you that might be taking over working with that client, it's not going to be helpful to them. It's just really, in my opinion, a bad practice. It's not a very ethical way of writing your progress notes. And I know that might seem a little harsh. And I do have a strong opinion about it. I just don't think it's a good idea. The fourth The fourth I see that happens with progress notes is using jargon that might make sense in your world, but it might not make sense in somebody else's world, meaning the therapist coming behind it. It's not really professional to use jargon. Using slang is not very professional. Your progress note, professional documentation. This is your professional record of the treatment that was provided to your client. So it needs to look professional. And if you're worried about all of those other things in terms of who's going to see it, then these would be things that would make sense to me. You'd be worried about how it comes across if you're using slang, jargon, or derogatory language in progress notes. So what do I slang, jargon, and derogatory language? First, let me make this distinction though. If you're quoting your client and they use slang, jargon, or a derogatory statement, that's fine to put in there. Put quotation marks around it and indicate that the client said it. That way, and I think that's good practice to do that, because then you get what your clients were saying and doing in the session. Slang is like using words. I know this comes up a lot when you're working with adolescents, or if you're, depending on what kind of agency you're working in, if you work with a population that has a diagnosis or they struggle with addiction. And here in the United States, one of the slang terms for marijuana is weed. I'm sure there's other ones now, but you don't want to write weed. You want to write marijuana. It's just a little more professional. Jargon, not everybody understands the jargon, so it's more psychotherapy jargon. The only thing that I would say would be different about psychotherapy jargon is if the terminology used is part of your assessment, and your assessment is going to be influenced by your play therapy model, case conceptualization, then it fits in there. But if you're just using jargon that not very many people would know about, then you may want to just write the kind of the professional term. The other one is derogatory language. I think this one comes up a lot. Here's the one that I see frequently. And I always encourage the people that I supervise, or the people when I'm doing trainings, I always suggest, instead of using the word client refused, which is kind of derogatory, if you want to be more neutral, I typically say, because and they might have refused. They might have just said, no, I'm not going to do it. Or, you're trying to get parents to use a certain approach to parenting, and let's say they're a high acuity family, like generations of trauma, addiction, poverty, and attachment problems, and parenting skills that were passed on through the generation that were less than healthy. And this is a parent got their own trauma and attachment issues, and they're struggling. But let's say their behavior isn't always so lovely. And I think it's important for us to look below the behavior. So even then, I'll write parent declined, the strategy suggested, or something. I'm just making something up on the fly. Or client, I like to use declined instead of refused, because declined is less negative, less kind of value based towards that client. What we want to do in these progress notes is neutral language that is gonna be more factual. And then our assessment is going to be based on our play therapy model, or the clinical model that we're using. So that influences how we're doing our case conceptualization and where they are in the treatment process. So if you use neutral language, then one, your fear about the records getting subpoenaed is not going to get you as many questions or cause you as much stress about what's going to happen with that. And it's much more professional, I think, because the other thing that you have to watch out for, especially in the language that you're using, are your biases. Your progress notes will also reflect any biases that you have. So if you're checking your biases, then your progress notes are going to be much more neutral. They're going to be based on your clinical model. You'll be able to support them much more effectively, which is the concern about progress notes. So I think when you get into these habits and get your mind kind of starting working this way, what you find is then your progress note writing gets much quicker once you've kind of trained yourself and gotten a structure and gotten a format that you use to write these progress notes. So that is it for today. Let me just do a quick little recap. First, too little information is not helpful. Your progress notes are a record of the treatment that you provided. And so this is a skill like any other skill that we develop as therapists, the skill of documentation. And it's an important skill because it shows the record, it provides the record of the treatment that your client was provided, what issues they were working through, what barriers or challenges came up along the way, how your client worked through those, any progress they made. You can use the same language, the language with your treatment plan, and that treatment plan is going to align with your case conceptualization. So your ability to support your progress notes will definitely be evident when you think about all of that golden thread connection there. So writing too little information as a way of protecting the notes isn't necessarily what ends up happening. And while it is a good time saver, and we're all looking for good ways of saving time, it's not necessarily the most effective way of doing it. And once you kind of train yourself to know what to look for and what format to put it in, and you develop some of your own language that you can use, then your progress notes will get, your writing will get, so you'll be able to accomplish that time-saving benefit. Much information is just as not a good idea as writing too little. You don't need to put every little teeny tiny detail in there. You just need to find the relevant and important aspects of the session and document that. And then writing the same thing for each session using that kind of copy and paste strategy is not a good strategy because it looks like you're not being ethical. And you might be, but your progress notes might not indicate. It looks like potential fraud. So your progress notes, each one is a record of what happened in each session. So you really want to make sure you provide enough information, not too little, not too much, but just right, like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You want to get just right, enough information to support that, and enough information that demonstrates what was addressed in each session. And the likelihood it's the same thing over and over and over, 100%, is not very high. Even though there are going to be some similar themes over time, that does happen. There will be different nuances from session to session, and you want to make sure to reflect those. So that will avoid having any ethical or legal or even financial negative outcomes, because some insurance companies, if your documentation can't support the billing code used, some insurance companies will require you, here in the US anyway, to pay that money back. And that is always a painful process. And then finally, watch what you write. This is a professional record, so you want to make sure that it reflects that in your progress note. Don't use pejorative language, use professional language. Check your biases in there. So that is it for today, and I will see you next year. Bye. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Next Level Play Therapy. I hope you found the discussion valuable and gained new insights and ideas to support your work helping children, adolescents, and families heal. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Your feedback helps to improve and reach more people who can benefit from this information. Remember, play therapy is a powerful tool for healing and growth. Whether you're a new play therapist or experienced, I encourage you to continue your learning journey to unlock the potential of play in your own work and relationships. If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on social media and visit my website at Renewing Hearts Play Therapy Training to stay updated on upcoming episodes, trainings, and resources. Thank you once again for listening to Next Level Play Therapy. Until next time, keep playing, learning, and growing.